Hi, I want to talk a little bit about grinding. If you are going to work hand tools, use planes, chisels, sooner or later you're going to have to reestablish your primary bevel. Now that's the main bevel on either a plane blade or a chisel. And if you have to do that, you're moving a fair bit of metal. If you're trying to do it with just water stones or oil stones or even a diamond stone, it takes a long time. I've always told my students, I said, listen, go out and buy yourself an inexpensive grinder. I'll show you mine. This one's a little more than $100, but it's got some features on there that I never use. Variable speed, I never change it, leave it at one setting. For $100 or less, you can buy a decent grinder. I always told my students to get a coarse wheel. The coarser the wheel, the faster it cuts, the cooler it cuts. And of course, the problem that everybody worries about when using a grinder is that you're going to burn the steel. I'm going to address that issue as well. First thing you need to know is that the inexpensive grinders usually have really lousy tool rests. And the tool rest is an essential part of the kit. So buy the $100 grinder, throw the tool rest away, and get yourself one of these Wolverine grinding jigs made by a company called One Way. It fastens to the table, so you don't have to worry about it fitting your grinder because it doesn't actually attach to the grinder. Now you may have to pad it up a little bit, but that's easy to do. And then it just bolts to the grinder, or bolts to the base, sorry. It's easy to adjust. Everything works off of a cam. Get it where you want it, lock it. The tool rest is nice and heavy. It's 1/4 inch thick steel. It acts as a great heat sink. Lots of surface area to work on, good and stable. Everything that you want in a tool rest. And it's not that expensive. All right, now let's go back over here and look at look what we have for stones. Until recently, you've only really had one option, and that was this type of a stone. Has a paper washer on either side. That's critical, by the way. Prevents too much pressure being applied in any one spot and possibly breaking or fracturing your stone. You have bushings in here that you can use to fit the diameter of the shaft on your grinder. And they're a fired product, fairly porous. You have to dress them. They're not terribly well balanced. You're going to see that in a moment. And what's new is these diamond coated grinding wheels. So like my diamond water stone, this has diamond that's adhered to a big hunk of steel. This thing must weigh 8 pounds. And it runs nice and true, and it cuts amazingly fast, and it's got some huge advantages. In fact, that's what we use now. But I'm going to walk you through using this one, and then we'll use that diamond one as well. So the first thing you got to do is get this thing to fit. Like I said, you have to adjust your bushings. Mine is a 5/8 shaft, so that'll sit on there. And I've got a fairly large diameter washer on the inside, and then another one on the outside. And this particular grinder has a rather unique nut on it. So you put your big flange on there, and then this thing spins on. You can never get these excessively tight. Now is this a reverse? No, this isn't. Snug that up, and then you split this washer, or push it off like that, and a little bit spring loads it somehow. Anyway, it keeps it nice and snug. Now I want that to run true, so I'm going to turn this on and check it, and I may have to stop and readjust it. No, that's actually not too bad. You can hear in the vibration that it's not perfectly true, but I can work with that. A lot of times when you do this, you'll end up having to stop it, reposition it. I've had to do it 3 or 4 times to try to get it to run right. I'm going to let this wind down so I can carefully put the outside fence or cover back on, and then when we come back we'll go through dressing this and showing you how to use it. Now the face of these sometimes get clogged, and when they do, it really slows down the cutting. So this is an inexpensive wheel dresser. It's a cast iron handle. It's got a whole bunch of little, I wouldn't call them cutters, but these little wheels with spokes on them. They wear away, so when they're worn down completely, you just simply change them. But it's a little bit intimidating to use because of how aggressive it is. I'll show you how. I'm just going to adjust the tool rest so it's a little closer to being parallel to the floor. And I'll turn this on. Now if your wheel's not running true at all, you've got to go in there and actually true it up. And there's some various kit that you can buy to do that. This company actually makes one. In fact, I want to show you that because it's actually pretty neat, although it's rather expensive. Give me a second to dig that out. So here's the apparatus I was telling you about, but before I show you that one, let me just show you this. It's a little less expensive. This is just a diamond wheel dresser. It's a plastic handle that's got some kind of a hard rod in there, and you would use that just to run across the face of the stone to true it up. And that'll get you close. The nice thing about this one is it's far more accurate. So you would take the platform assembly out, and then this slides in, lock it in place, and then this has a diamond point on it, and you have to maintain that, meaning you have to rotate it occasionally. An industrial diamond in there. That sits down in here, and you would simply move that in. Until you move it side to side, and then as you turn the knob down here in the bottom, it'll bring it closer and closer. So you can hear how that's not perfectly true, and you would just move that back and forth until you eventually true up this wheel. And you can't go fast. You have to just do it a little bit at a time. I'm keeping pressure down here below the resting point. Turn of that dial on the bottom each time brings it a little bit closer. I'm not going to do all this on camera because it takes way too long, but that's the option you have with that particular tool rest. Now, the problem with doing that is that when you're done, it leaves that wheel so smooth. It's very it's the lack of what I want. It's the opposite of what I want, which is I want it to be aggressive. So this goes in, and this really opens up the face, and you have to apply fairly stiff pressure. I actually like to shape the wheel a little bit by just knocking off the outside corners. And you don't have to do that terribly often, but you'll be able to tell because the wheel just doesn't respond like it does when you initially do that. Put my tool rest in there. Now, before we work on here, let's go back over to the bench and discuss when you need to grind. The most obvious reason for regrinding is when your secondary bevel, so this part right here is the primary bevel. Beyond that, you see that shiny area. That's your secondary bevel. Every time I re-hone on the stones, that secondary bevel is going to get a little bit wider, which means I'm having to move more and more material. It gets to this width. I don't want to have to keep moving all that, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to extend my primary bevel almost all the way to the end to shorten that secondary to make my sharpening process a lot quicker. That would be reason number one, and the most common reason. Reason number two, you've dropped the plane or the blade and you've severely knocked a corner in it, or you've hit something and put a big ding in there, and you've got to get down quite a bit in order to get past that. The third reason is, and this often happens, when you're freehand sharpening, especially when you're first learning, you have a tendency to lean heavier on one side than the other, and you eventually throw that blade out of square. Well, most planes don't have a whole lot of lateral adjustment. So you can see how much I have. That doesn't translate into a whole lot of degrees away from perfectly square. And if you go beyond that, you're not going to be able to get even projection of the blade out of the sole, which means you're not going to get an even thickness shaving side to side. Now on a bench plane, you have your lateral adjustment lever. Does the same thing. The bevel's actually down. That sits in this long slot, and there's what you have for movement. Now it looks like a lot, but when it actually gets down here, it's not very much at all. So you have to stay pretty close to square. So those are the three primary reasons. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, and I'm going to walk you through getting this set up. Now, assuming that your original primary bevel was the angle that you want, which typically is going to be 25 degrees, I'll set this on the tool rest. You can do this with it running or not running. I'm not actually going to touch it, so I'm just going to get close. I'm eyeballing that, and I can see that I need to raise this up a little bit. Lock it. It's a bit high still. I just touched that, and I'm touching up here. I want to touch flat on this, what's left of that primary bevel, so I'll raise it up a little bit more. Okay, so you see that area right there? Can you pick up that frick on the focus? That area just to the left of the red mark?
Yep.
Okay. So I know that this tool rest is now holding the blade at 25 degrees to that stone. So now what I'm going to do is go in there and I'm going to work that primary bevel until I make most of that shiny secondary bevel disappear. Now I need to move over here, so can you want to film on the other side? I use my left hand to keep the blade tight to the face of the tool rest. If in the process of doing this, I allow the blade to lift up off of that tool rest, I'm going to get multiple facets on there, and I don't want that. So this hand is going to keep it tight to this, and by keeping it tight, that also acts as a heat sink to help keep this blade cool. I prefer to start with the edge of the blade somewhere around the middle of the stone. If you're out here and trying to enter it, you're usually going to hit the corner of your blade is going to hit the edge of the wheel, and you're going to knock your corner off. So while holding it tight to the tool rest, I'm going to move it forward and move it laterally. Pick up that point where it engages, and at this mark, I disengage. And then I'll come back and disengage. And disengage. If you stay engaged, in other words, if you go over and back without removing it, you double grind, or you grind twice as long in that one area, and you'll start to see that that ends up dropping down, or you may even actually overheat it, particularly when you get close to the edge. You don't have to go fast. I might add very light pressure. Now you notice that when I was dressing the face of this stone, I ground the outside edges away. I prefer to have it somewhat crowned and high in the middle. If I need to go in and work in an area, whether it be this corner or right in the middle, if I have it slightly crowned, I know my contact point is right there. And I can go in and I can do whatever I need to in order to shape that edge. I like to keep my fingers up close to the edge. And I can tell if it gets too hot. And by the way, these wheels are really inexpensive. In fact, I think they're somewhere around $20, so you're not having to fork out a whole lot of money. And you want to, like I mentioned, a really coarse wheel. I think the coarsest I've been able to find is a 40, which it'll cut cool and it'll cut fast compared to a finer stone. This surface, the primary bevel, never touches the wood, so the surface quality doesn't matter. It's not going to impact your planing one way or the other, so you may as well get the job done as quickly as possible, and to avoid burning, get it done as cool as possible. Now, when I say disengage, don't pull way down here, because then you're having to go back in and locate that contact point again. I just barely pull away, just enough so it no longer touches. That's hot, but it's not so hot that I need to dip it. Now, you look right here on that crest, and you can tell how you're doing. And I can see right there that that's starting to dip down a little bit. I can also see that I'm closer to the edge right here than I am anywhere else. So I'm going to avoid this corner. until the rest of the bevel catches up. And if it gets too hot, you can just hold it against the tool rest for a second. If you want to be even quicker than that, you can have a bottle of water handy and dip it in there. I actually usually have a bottle of Hone Right so that if I end up leaving something wet that's metal, it'll evaporate and I don't have to worry about rust. Flip that over and check it again. I'm probably, yeah, I'm going to take about half of what you see there. I want to get rid of. And the more you do this, you can get faster at it in terms of moving across the stone. But you can't try to make it faster by applying more pressure. That'll only overheat. And if you do overheat, and you, what we call draw the temper out of the steel, the only way to correct it is to grind down below that burned area. And that in itself is a bit tricky. I prefer, if you do that, to actually lay your tool rest perpendicular to the wheel, go in there and literally grind against that flat edge to get down to where you want. Or I actually do this too, if my blade isn't perfectly square, rather than try to shape it this way, which means you're eventually working with just a feather edge, I'll go in there, hold it perpendicular, or not perpendicular, yes, perpendicular to the face, or tangent would actually be the right word. Get it, shape that edge. Now it's blunt, but it's now straight or square, and then I'll go in, reposition my tool rest, and cut the primary bevel at 25 degrees back down until you get to a point again. That way you're not working with that little feather edge, which is so easy to burn. Okay, that's getting pretty close. Still a little bit low there, but that's from the original error. You can hear how I'm not making contact all the way around the perimeter of this stone because it is a little bit out of round. I just didn't take the time to go in there and try to true it up. You can't move a lot of material very fast with that little diamond pointed dressing wheel or dressing tool. Now, since there's no damage on the edge of that blade, it's not out of square, there's no bad nicks, there's no reason to take the primary bevel all the way through. So I'm going to get really close, which I'm almost there now, and stop there. And that'll just make my future honings a lot easier because there's very little metal to remove. That's good. I'd leave it at that. Now, the only downside to this particular wheel is you have to true it, you have to dress it, and occasionally as it gets clogged up, you've got to go in and dress it again with that tool that I showed you, and it's a bit unnerving the few times you do it, first few times you do it, but you get the hang of it. And it's a little bit on the dirty side too. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut this down, and I'm going to we'll pick the camera up again when we're putting on the diamond wheel, and I'll show you the advantages of that system. All right, to start with the disadvantages. That last stone wheel I showed you was $20. I think these are $180, but I also think they're worth it. It has diamond on the face and on one side, and then on that side you can use it on either side of your grinder. It's bored for 5/8, so you don't have to use any bushings. And I said it is heavy. Place that on there. Snug it up. far as durability, we put these on, I'm going to guess and say 5 months ago. We do a lot of grinding. We grind our 17-degree chisels. We make our half-blind chisels, and Jake does a lot of those. And this thing is still working, so, and it still cuts, I think, as well as it did the day we put it on. Now, before I fire that up, I'm going to put a little wedge back in here just to keep that from vibrating. Let's put it down on this side. No, on this one. This is an IBC blade. The last one we did was the original blade off of Wood River Plains. The IBCs are probably a little bit, actually I know they're a little bit harder. I gotta get my head down in here to see. Okay, that looks good. We'll fire this up. Now the nice thing about this, you don't ever have to dress it. It stays true. It runs true as soon as you put it on. So not having to dress it actually is a pretty big deal. Probably the biggest, there's two real big advantages. One is the speed that it cuts. The other one I discovered accidentally is it acts like its own heat sink. So whereas the other stone we were using is so porous, all the heat ends up in the blade. In this one, it's almost as if the heat stays in that wheel, because I'll grind a blade like this and it doesn't even get beyond lukewarm. Same idea, keep it tight to the tool rest. I'm just going to check and see, and we're pretty much right on where the original primary bevel was. Now obviously I can't go in and dress those corners like I used to, but I can live with that. Okay. Same idea as the last one. I'm just going to get really close to the edge. Don't want to go all the way through the secondary bevel, but I want to shrink it down quite a bit. Maybe just a little bit more. Okay, that's good. Nice clean primary bevel. From my eye it looks pretty square, so I don't have to adjust anything that way. I've got that secondary down quite small, so it won't take very long at all to hone it. Now those things are so heavy that it'll run for the next 5 minutes, but it will eventually stop. Anyway, that's pretty much it with the grinder. Obviously the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Things to remember: very, very light pressure. Don't let the blade overheat. Don't be in a hurry. It takes a while. A little bit faster with a diamond wheel than the original stone or whatever it is wheel. And 8-inch, by the way, seems to be the most popular today. I think you have a much greater variety available to you if you go with 8-inch over a 6. Grinders aren't expensive. They're not difficult to use, and I class them as a hand tool. Anyway, good luck with this.